For decades now, since Bob Lazar hit the airwave right up until Dave Grush sat in front of Congress, there has been this tantalizing idea that the US government has been hiding UFOs in Area 51. It has been the subject of cinema for decades, even before Bob Lazar. But with some of the recent disclosures and words from Congress people who are hearing things behind closed doors, this is probably the most tantalizing time in history to look at some of these events, and some back even as far as Mussolini's government in 1933. So in this episode, we're going to go through every alleged UFO recovery around the world and try and figure out which one of them actually had alien bodies and which of them were simply jockeys escaping from their caravans. This is every UFO recovery ever. I'm Jason Hassett, and welcome to the Jason Hassett Show.
Do it live!
I am not going to exploit.
200. A Pizza Express in Woking.
Your line of questioning is transphobic.
Now watch this drive.
Fucking thing sucks!
Hello everybody and welcome back to the Jason Hassett Show, where this week we're going to be talking about those pesky UFOs, those UAPs that the government are quite annoyed about. And the reason for this is in the final episode of Conspiracy Series, which is coming out on my main channel very shortly, I cover the entire UFO reverse engineering program, and I thought it would be interesting to cover something more in detail than I did in that, which is the actual recoveries of UFOs. There's been so many alleged recoveries over the years spanning from 1933 to now, essentially, and in the USA as well as Russia and so on. And I thought it would be an interesting one to go through every single recovery that has been alleged. And I think I've covered all of them here. But as always on this channel, and if you're new here, welcome first of all, we get this information from the interwebs, which, as you may be aware, is wildly unreliable. And therefore, if there's something I've missed or something that is incorrect, please do go down into the comments and let everybody know so we can all learn from each other and make the internet a nice place instead of shouting at each other like we always do. And while you're down there, why not leave a like, a subscribe, and ping that little notification bell so that I can get cold, hard ad cash. Let's get into the episode. So we kick off our journey in 1933 of all places, and this has been rumored for a while but was essentially brought into the mainstream by David Grush's testimony, where he alleged that in 1933 a UFO was collected by Mussolini's government and that the Vatican helped to broker a deal to hand it over to the US and so on after the war. Pretty crazy story. But this was the Italian Mussolini crash that happened on June 13th, 1933, and it's the earliest known claim of a recovered otherworldly craft, and it came in fascist Italy. Italian researcher Roberto Pinotti unearthed secret documents indicating that on June 13th, 1933, a flying saucer crashed in Lombardy and was recovered by Mussolini's government. Allegedly, a secret study group, the RS-33 cabinet led by Marconi, was formed to study the craft. According to Pinotti, and echoed by whistleblower David Grush, American forces obtained the Italian UFO at the end of World War II, supposedly with help from the Vatican, that pesky Pope, making it allegedly the first UAP taken into US custody. Grush has testified he saw several archival documents about a 1933 spacecraft of exotic origin recovered in Italy and later transferred to US. While the Italian documents have not been fully authenticated, this case sets a precedent for UAP retrieval claims by predating Roswell by over 14 years. Absolutely insane if it's true. And yeah, I really, really hope we start to get more of these documents. Obviously, all of the stuff that's been talking about, you get the usual stuff. Oh, well, I could talk to you about it if it was in a classified setting. And then Trump says, I'll do it really big. Can't do my Trump impression anymore, which is quite annoying. I used to be able to do it quite well, and it's gone now. But I can do Ani, so it's fine. California. So then we go a few years later, 8 years later, sorry to be exact, to the Cape Girardeau incident in April of 1941. An alleged crash occurred in Missouri. The account comes from local folklore and family's testimony. A preacher named William Huffman was called out one night to pray over victims of a supposed plane crash, only to find a round silver disc torn open in a field and 3 alien bodies among the debris. According to Huffman's granddaughter's recollection, 2 small grey beings were dead and a third dying, all about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, with large heads and eyes. And soon, the US military arrived, securing the area and allegedly swore witnesses to secrecy. Researcher Paul Blake Smith, who wrote a book on it, noted everyone was told, do not talk about this, it didn't happen. Getting hard evidence has been like trying to nail jello to the wall. FOIA requests to the Army and FBI yielded no official records, meaning this remains an anecdotal yet intriguing case of an early crash retrieval rumor. Insane. And this is, again, before Roswell, the one that really pushed this idea into the mainstream. Jumping ahead then to 1945, the Trinity avocado crash. 2 years before Roswell, a purported crash took place near the Trinity nuclear site in New Mexico in August of 1945, not long after the first atomic bomb, which has been theorized over and over again to be the reason why there are so many visits straight after 1945. 2 young ranchers, Jose Padilla, who is 9, and Remigo Baca, who was 7, claimed to see a bright egg-shaped object fall from the sky. The craft was described as to be in the shape of an avocado with a domed top, and the boys observed small insectoid or humanoid creatures inside. Over several days, Army personnel from White Sands allegedly came. This story was little known until documented by investigators Jack Valet and Paula Harris in a 2021 book, which presented it as the earliest evidence of US government UFO recovery. While some skeptics doubt the Trinity case, noting the witnesses came forward decades later, it is supported by detailed testimony and even fragments said to be from the site. If true, it does suggest that the start of real retrieval efforts started after World War II and links these UAPs to the atomic heritage of the USA. Although, I guess the 1933 account, if true, also predates that, so kind of doesn't, but who knows? If the US government really has been collecting alien craft, then they probably won't want you searching for where are the aliens, goddammit, on public Wi-Fi. And that's where NordVPN comes in. Whether you're looking up leaked documents, Area 51 photos, or just trying to stream UFO documentaries that are mysteriously unavailable in your location, NordVPN has you covered. Your data is encrypted, your IP address is hidden, and your online activity stays more classified than those non-human biologics. And for November, running up to Black Friday, you can get up to 77% off and up to 3 months free on a 2-year plan using my link in the description below, or simply going to nordvpn.com/Hassett right now. But you better run, because they could change that deal whenever they want, like anytime, really. I mean, it's complete. Maybe this, I don't know what the laws are. Let's get back to the video. And of course, then there's Roswell, 2 years later in 1947, where something crashed in July on a ranch outside Roswell, New Mexico. This sparking the most famous incident of all time. On July 8th, 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield issued an extraordinary press release announcing it had retrieved a flying disc from the crash site. The local Roswell Daily News ran a banner headline, "RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell, sending shockwaves around the world." Almost immediately, however, those pesky Army people changed their story. The saucer was now a weather balloon that had been blown apart. The incident was subsequently hushed up for decades, and it wasn't until the late 1970s that Roswell resurfaced, when retired officers and witnesses told researchers that non-human debris and even alien bodies were recovered. According to first-hand accounts compiled later, the wreckage had bizarre qualities: tinfoil that wouldn't crease, beams with strange symbols, and several small humanoid bodies were allegedly found and flown to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The US Air Force officially re-examined Roswell in the 1990s, concluding that the debris was from the top-secret Project Mogul balloons, and was used to detect Soviet nuclear sites, and in 1997 suggested that the alien bodies witnesses remembered were likely crash test dummies or charred remains of airmen from unrelated incidents, which is bizarre. So the story is that it's this specific Project Mogul balloon and that you could account for the metal debris being very strange with advanced radar technology that was up in those balloons, which is fair enough, but then why would crash test dummies be in it? And then what they tried to do as well was to say that those people had mixed this up and were, crossing over things that they had saw in a later incident in the 1950s, even though the testimony of the alien bodies came from 1947, not after. So it doesn't really make sense. The incident's legacy is huge. It cemented the idea of the government collecting alien craft, and the whole idea of Area 51 and Roswell and so on kicked off from this. In March of 1948, we had another one in Aztec. Another object is alleged to have come down near Hart Canyon in Aztec, New Mexico, in what some call the other Roswell. The story, first told by journalist Frank Scully in 1950, claimed that a 99-foot disc with 16 small humanoid bodies was recovered by the US military. According to Scully's source, that is massive. That's insane. I mean, it could, in fairness, there are 16 small humanoid bodies on a 99-foot disc. This could just be some eccentric trip for the local jockeys. Who knows? You know what I mean? Have we ever thought about that? Like aliens that everyone sees, small greys, like they could be jockeys. You know what I mean? Anyway, according to Scully's sources, the craft was relatively intact and was whisked away for a secret research. However, by the mid-1950s, the Aztec's tale had been exposed as a likely hoax, perpetrated by con men or jockeys who fabricated the story to sell alien technology gadgets. Indeed, two grifters, Silas Newton and Leo Gauber, were later convicted of fraud, and their UFO crash tale was essentially a scam. The FBI even wrote an internal memo in 1950, the Hotel Memo, relaying a third-hand account about 3 so-called flying saucers recovered in New Mexico with small alien bodies in each. But the Bureau had said a second or third-hand claim that we never investigated, likely based on the Aztec hoax story circulating at the time. Despite its dubious origin, the Aztec crash legend refuses to die. Jumping into the 1950s then, it doesn't let up. And in Kingsman, Arizona, we have another incident. An intriguing but still unconfirmed account involves a supposed crash near Kingsman, Arizona in May of 1953. The story emerged from leaked documents and a first-hand witness account from a man named Arthur Stanzel, whose alias was Fritz Werner, who claimed in 1973 that he was part of a military recovery team. According to these claims, a compact saucer-shaped craft came down in the desert with one occupant, about 4 feet tall, another jockey, recovered alive or dead depending on the version. In recent years, some prominent figures like Chris Mellon have noted references to a 1953 UFO retrieval in government conversations. For example, a leaked memorandum recounts officials discussing the US seized a UFO back in 1953 that crashed outside Kingsman. No official report has confirmed Kingsman, and skeptics suggest it might be conflated with known test crashes. Still, the tale persists at the dawn of the Cold War, just as the US was testing advanced aircraft and atomic bombs. Still, the tale persists at a time where the Cold War was kicking off, at a time when the US was testing advanced craft and atomic bombs. Another UFO incident is gathered in amongst all of that. Und then there is the incident in 1965 in Kecksburg. But it's not Kecksburg in Germany, it's Kecksburg in Pennsylvania. See what I did there? Because Kecksburg sounds very German. It does. Kecksburg. It just does. On December 9th, 1965, a fiery object streaked over the US and Canada and reportedly crashed in the woods near Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Dozens of locals saw a bright fireball and blue smoke. Witnesses who ran towards the impact site described finding a metallic acorn-shaped capsule, the size of a VW Beetle, but allegedly not a VW Beetle, half buried on a hillside. The object had strange markings similar to hieroglyphics around its base, and was warm to the touch. The area was soon cordoned off by the US Army and state police, who ordered civilians out. One flatbed truck was seen leaving the area with a large acorn-shaped object covered by a tarp on the back. Officially, the military stated they had found, wait for it, absolutely nothing, which seems like an inconvenient thing to tell people who've seen something, in the woods, and labeled the incident likely a meteor or re-entering satellite. In 2005, NASA finally disclosed that its experts had re-examined metal fragments from Kecksburg and determined that it came from the fallen Soviet satellite Cosmos 96, but that NASA's records of the analysis were inexplicably lost in the 1980s. Journalist Leslie Keane sued NASA to find the missing files, prompting a fresh search and much controversy. To this day, a model of the Kecksburg acorn still sits on display in the town, making it kind of Pennsylvania's Roswell. And then in 1967, there was a hugely popular case still prompted all of the time by UFO nerds, which is the Shag Harbor case. Shag Harbor. In Canada. It's one of the best documented cases in Canada, occurring on October 4th of 1967, when numerous people observed a low-flying lit object streak over Shag Harbor in Nova Scotia and apparently crash into the sea. Witnesses reported a glowing light bobbing on the water before submerging. The Canadian Coast Guard and Royal Canadian Navy conducted a search for aircraft wreckage, believing an airplane might have gone down. No debris or body were found, no aircraft was missing. The Royal Canadian Air Force labelled it an unknown object in official reports. According to later testimony from divers, there were whispers that 2 underwater UFOs travelled up the coast to a nearby submarine base after the crash, evading capture, though this is not confirmed in any declassified files. Formerly, Shag Harbor remains an unsolved case. The Canadian government acknowledged something fell into the ocean, but it was never identified as anything, leading many to suspect that this is a covert or military cover-up afoot. Unlike Roswell or Kecksburg, any recovered material here would have been underwater, making this more USO or unidentified submersible object. Regardless, it was a big story that even hit the newspapers at the time. And during the 1960s, it wasn't just in America that we had these UFO crash and retrieval stories. The Soviets had their own Roswell-type incidents. One famous account alleges that in 1969, a UFO crashed near Sverdlovsk, which I'm definitely pronouncing incorrectly, in Yekaterinburg, and a KGB recovery team retrieved a disc and bodies, complete with black and white film that leaked in the 1990s, reportedly showing Soviet soldiers inspecting a saucer and an alien corpse. While that footage was widely considered a hoax, researchers like Paul Stonehill have documented Soviet-era UFO cases where fragments were analysed. Another case, the 1968 Berwyn Mountains incident in Wales, sometimes called the Welsh Roswell or sheep-shagging Roswell to be exact, involved an RAF search for a supposed crashed object after residents saw a fireball and felt tremors. The official explanation was a meteor and earthquake coincidence. These international cases lack robust evidence like Roswell or Kecksburg, but they illustrate that these UAP stories are a global phenomenon, and also that apparently there's earthquakes in Wales. Now, I lived in Dublin, which is very, very close to Wales, and I've been in Wales a few times. I'm from Dublin. I don't think they get earthquakes there. Maybe I'm wrong. Like, I know they shag a lot of sheep in Wales, but, you know, do webbed fingers cause earthquakes? Can we Google that? We offended enough people? Moving on. And then we go back to the 80s, back to the Soviet Union, before Gorbachev had pulled down that wall, to the Dalngorsk incident, or Height 611 as it's known. On January 29th, 1986, residents of Dalngorsk, a mining town in eastern Russia, witnessed a reddish spherical object silently streak through the sky and impact the slope of Mount Virginica Seaman. Unlike many UFO cases, this one left tangible debris, and this debris was studied by Soviet scientists. Investigators led by Professor Valery Dvludin recovered numerous metallic fragments and strange mesh-like threads near the crash site. Analysis of the samples yielded baffling results. The metal was a super strong alloy, containing an array of elements, a who's who of the elements from the periodic table, and all in very unusual ratios. Some fragments were like vitrified metal and resisted cutting except with diamond tools. Even stranger, there was a fine gauze-like mesh composed of micro-thin gold and quartz fibers intertwined, an incredibly advanced material by 1986 standards. Soviet authorities initially suspected, obviously, that this was some sort of advanced American spy device or weapon that had crashed, but as you would suspect, US sources denied any such technology. The Downgorsk incident was taken seriously, though. For days, military teams scoured the hills, and within a year, multiple UFOs were reportedly seen scouting the same area as if searching for their fallen compadre. Russian researchers concluded that the materials were neither traces of natural meteorites nor products of earthly technologies. In other words, Downgorsk may represent a genuine, non-human crash retrieval, albeit of a small probe-like craft. Again, this is sometimes called Russia's Roswell, showing that not only do we not have clear public evidence of UFOs, we also have a massive lack of creativity when it comes to coming up with names for these goddamn events. It does lack alleged bodies, though. The bodies may have hit the floor. Let the body... Most interestingly, though, the physical evidence that they collected from this was not kept secret. It wasn't kept hidden away. Soviet scientists published papers on the anomalous metal compositions. This gives the case a measure of credibility since it wasn't solely anecdotal. If the fragments truly defied known technology, one could infer the Soviets, and later the Russians, quietly learned a lot from the crash. Some ufologists believe that Downgorsk recovered material is exactly the sort of metamaterial that today's Pentagon UAP programs are interested in, with unique isotope ratios and so on. One of the most dramatic cases, though, in a brilliant documentary, I think it's called Moments of Contact, by James Fox, I want to say, was the Varginha incident in 1996 in Brazil. Unlike the hardware-centric case we just covered, Varginha centered on alleged creatures. Over several days, numerous residents reported strange events. A cigar-shaped UFO seen slowly falling from above the sky, and small alien beings roaming the town afterwards. Again, they could be jockeys, but it's alleged. On January 20th, 1996, three girls infamously spotted a short, brown, oily-skinned being with a large head and red eyes crouching by a wall. It seemed injured or sick. I'm not seeing any evidence that this isn't jockeys. That's how I would describe a jockey. The Brazilian authorities, army and fire department responded to multiple calls about an unknown animal and purportedly captured at least two entities. One creature was said to have been taken to a local hospital and then to an army facility in a tragic twist. A young military policeman who allegedly handled the being with his bare hands, Marco Xerez, died shortly after getting a mysterious infection known as jockeyitis. The Brazilian army basically denied any claims of it being aliens, and instead what they said officially was that what these girls must have seen was a mentally ill homeless man called Medinho who had covered himself in mud and was clearly sick and crouching, and therefore what the girls saw was not an alien with red eyes, but instead a homeless man. Quite bizarre. I still think a jockey would have been an easier description. They also claimed that the military trucks seen in the area at the time recovering things and so on were just routine movements. Despite the denial, independent investigators and media found multiple local witnesses, including a hospital staff member and an army source, who maintained that something extraordinary was recovered. In 2022, filmmaker James Fox's documentary Moment of Contact featured an anonymous Brazilian military ex who claims he was present when the aliens were captured, and that video evidence exists, though none has surfaced publicly. Intriguingly, many witnesses also state that US military personnel arrived quickly and whatever was recovered was flown out to the United States, possibly under a technology exchange deal. This mirrors what Grush has said publicly about how these things work. And also, I know that in a few of the discussions about these incidents, the entire town essentially talks about all of them getting this bizarre, horrible odor throughout the entire city, which probably backs up the homelessmen, right? I guess. But the thing is about all of these is that, look, there's no more notable retrieval cases after 96. If there is, please let me know. I want to cover more. But what makes these so much more intriguing now is, for example, in Virginia, they saw a quote-unquote cigar-shaped UFO dropping out of the sky. And then the 2004 Tic Tac incident, if you watch that video, if you hear them describe it, you could describe that as a cigar-shaped object as well, especially a cigar in the shape where before it's cut, literally how a cigar would look. And I think people in Brazil would describe a Tic Tac more as a cigar than a Tic Tac. You know what I mean? So that kind of adds up. But we've had lots and lots of whistleblowers come forward as well that I think adds some credibility to this. And while one of them that I'm about to discuss, Bob Lazar, has obviously been written off quite a bit, with everything that goes forward, again, it's like the case of JFK, for example, where one coincidence is a coincidence. Multiple coincidences, hundreds of coincidences is very difficult. And with all of these whistleblowers kind of saying the same thing, especially people from the military, people with proper credibility, it does make old stories like Bob Lazar's much more interesting, I think, because obviously it gives it a little bit more credibility, or at least it makes you wonder how his story is so close to this credible naval agent, even though maybe the naval agent just copied his story. Sure, you could explain it that way, but you know what I mean? It's hard to say. So beyond specific incidents, a pattern emerges. Numerous military and intelligence insiders have come forward, especially since the 1980s, claiming that crash retrieval and reverse engineering programs exist. Now, I covered this in detail in the new documentary, which is out hopefully on Friday. But check out the other channel anyway to make sure you have notifications on for that, where we go kind of in deep on that. But anyway, the first big of these, the first infamous one, was Bob Lazar in 1989, who came on the record as Dennis on his first television appearance and allegedly worked in a hidden S4 facility in Area 51 in Nevada, where the US was keeping 9 flying discs of extraterrestrial origin in hangars. Lazar said he was hired to help reverse engineer one of the craft's propulsion, an anti-gravity reactor powered by a mysterious element 115, and that he even briefly saw a small alien body during his time there. While Lazar provided no hard evidence and many aspects of his background have been discredited, his story ignited this public imagination. And it should be said as well that some of the discrediting has been a little bit interesting because they've discredited things very, very quickly, like the hand scanner that he said that everyone laughed at him about that then turned out to actually have been used in Area 51, or the fact that, he supposedly never set foot in Los Alamos but was able to kind of show people around, and there's been him on records, he's been in the papers as a physicist who works there, and there's people at MIT who knew him and so on. So I think the thing is, if it wasn't for the later discrediting of Grush and some others, I would kind of go, yeah, sure, you were discredited, whatever. But I think you have to take any discrediting now with a bit more of a grain of salt than you used to, given it's just happening over and over again to more credible people. Well, I'll talk about Grush in a minute. And also, Moscovium, or element 115, was synthesized in 2003, but it didn't match Lazar's description of a stable fuel. The reason for that, though, is because they couldn't keep it stable. So I guess we need to see if it can keep it stable. Is it something like what he talked about? The other thing that's really interesting about Lazar is the way he described the craft and their movement in the 1980s is essentially similar to what the craft we've recently seen in 2004, 2017 leaks and so on. Essentially how they move as well. Some of them doing like the body roll and, no plumes, no exhaust, anti-gravity-esque kind of, it just makes it more and more intriguing, doesn't it? It doesn't add really any, just to put the foot down on this, it doesn't make it true, but it does make it more tantalizing, In 1997, Colonel Philip J. Corso, a retired Army colonel, published the day after Roswell, claiming he had stewarded Roswell debris in the 1960s and ceded bits of alien technology to US companies leading to breakthroughs like fiber optics and Kevlar. Corso's credibility is debated. Some of his historical details are inaccurate, but he was a former Pentagon staffer who swore that a secret UFO exploitation project was real. Around that time, aerospace engineers like Dr. Eric Davis and intelligence veterans associated with Robert Bigelow were quietly briefing officials on what they had heard. Notably, a leaked 2002 Admiral Wilson memo allegedly recounts a meeting in which Admiral Thomas Wilson, former Defense Intelligence Agency chief, was told that a private aerospace contractor had craft that was not made by man and that he had been denied access to it. The memo quotes the program manager as saying they were trying to understand and exploit technologies of unknown origin, essentially confirming this and also saying that, even someone with your massive security clearance, top level security clearance, isn't on what's called a quote unquote bigot list and therefore can't come through. Of course, this is all alleged, but adds a little bit more tantalization to it and steers us away from thinking it might be jockeys. The most dramatic recent whistleblower is, of course, David Grush, a decorated former intelligence officer who in 2023 went public with claims that a secret UAP recovery program had existed for decades, hidden from Congress. Grush stated on the record that the US and other nations have obtained multiple craft of non-human origin, including intact vehicles and even dead pilots of those craft. Under oath in a congressional hearing, he affirmed that the government possesses non-human biologics from UAP crashes, and Grush says he has talked to over 40 eyewitnesses of these events and seen highly classified documents that he shouldn't have seen and so on, and that some people have been illegally harmed or silenced to keep secret. He also specifically brought up the 33 crash that we talked about earlier. And importantly, Grush did not personally see craft or bodies, but he testified that he had official documentation and oral testimony from others, and he filed an Inspector General complaint alleging a suppression of information. In response, the Pentagon has obviously flatly denied this. Yet Congress, since talking to some of these guys in the SCIF, I think Grush has talked to them in SCIF, but I know others have essentially come forward and talked on podcast and publicly about how they have talked to full-on eyewitnesses and seen documents and so on that have essentially convinced them that these projects are real and that we are not alone, which is wild, absolutely wild for Congress people to say. And look, the thing with these is I just feel like there's got to be something here. And like the way they discredited Grush to me was just outright funny. Either Grush is a proper like part of the disinformation campaign, if there is one running, for example, or they just really think that they can still get away with discrediting people in the way that they used to, because they essentially said he thought about committing suicide and was mentally ill after his time in the Iraq War in the early 2000s, right? Therefore, we couldn't take anything he says as, official. However, they gave him top secret clearance after that. So they said that they had documents of his mental illness and so on, and that his credibility was shot because of those documents from the mid-2000s. And yet from the mid-2000s up till 2023, the military who said these things gave him full top secret clearance, one of the highest clearances, and made him a decorated officer. So which is it, But anyway. But the serious question is, why would the government want to hide this from us and not go and tell us about it? And we know, and allegedly as well, I should say, because I don't think it's covered here, Hal Puthoff, who was a CIA officer, I believe, in charge of, or one of the leaders of the remote viewing weird project, which maybe we can go into at some time, of the CIA, has said that in 2002 or 2003, I think it was, the Bush administration actually got together a group of top officials from the intelligence agencies and top scientists, and they were talking about the idea of disclosure and basically said, look, what should we disclose this? Do all the numbers on it. Do you think it's a good idea? And they kind of came back and said, look, it'll upset the economy, religion, everything else, so we shouldn't disclose. It's not a good idea. However, the note that he said on that was, they were just told to do it as a piece of work, so they were never told whether this was just a hypothetical thing in case something's found, or whether it's based on them actually having something. But an interesting tidbit nonetheless. So obviously there's national security and a technological edge reason to keep these things secret. These things would be immensely valuable. If you retrieved a craft with advanced propulsion materials, you wouldn't want adversaries to know about it and get that edge or know that you have the upper hand, which makes sense. Obviously, there's avoiding public panic and social upheaval, which I just talked about, unfortunately, with the Hal Puthoff thing. So, beyond military concerns, authority might fear that there'll be a societal impacts or economic crash. And in the 1960s, a Brookings Institute report to NASA famously speculated that discovering alien artifacts or life could cause a public panic or undermine social institutions. And it's been suggested that they've kind of thought that way ever since. Of course, there is, preventing phone home scenarios or adversary panic. So in other words, if they are to let the public see these things, or if they do have alien bodies, for example, or aliens that are alive being kept and the public finds out, who's to say that this wouldn't cause those aliens to be freed by, people pushing for it, governments wanting them out to talk to them in Congress, and then you get some sort of phone home where the aliens show up with some sort of super weapon or whatever, And then, of course, there's two bureaucratic reasons. One is bureaucratic habit. They're just used to keeping these things secret until they absolutely need to use them, like the F-117, the B-2 bomber, the atomic bomb, all these things, they keep them secret as much as possible until they need to use them to have, as I said earlier, that technological edge. But also as well, because I think there's clearly been some shady stuff going on here, because we know that, line items and so on, and the way they bring these funds through special access programs, to run something this secret for so many decades off the books, without any oversight from Congress, would probably be funded pretty illegally, or at the very least there'd be some very dodgy mismanagement of funds and so on. So you can understand why some of that stuff would go. And I think after seeing government efficiency agency that Elon had set up, after seeing some of the reports from that, and I know that's a political swing ball, so I'm not getting into that point of view, but a few of the reports they brought up, which I do believe, which are, the government basically was not even categorizing things in its statements, do tell you that it would be very, very easy to just hide millions of dollars out of the billions of dollars each year that go into the Pentagon's like black funds and so on. And who knows, out of everywhere, for all we know, there's a $40 million paperclip yearly fee that's going to keep ET on popcorn, who knows? But yeah, I think it's just a really, really interesting one. And I think we're getting closer and closer to finding out the truth. But then I thought so as well in the 90s, the truth is out there. But here we are. Thanks everybody for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and do check out the main channel documentary coming soon. And I really appreciate you all subscribing, because genuinely it really helps us get to 1,000 subscribers on this channel, which is what we need to make some cash, because before that you don't get ads or anything. So it just really, really helped out with funding and allowing us to put a bit more back into the channel. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Take it easy. Goodbye.